Friday, April 9th in 2021, and this is a brand new podcast, what I believe will be the first episode of a brand new podcast called Get Smarter and Make Things. I'm your host, Craig Andera. Some of you, I'm guessing a lot of you, will know me from the Cognicast, the podcast I previously did when I was working at Cognitect. Took a bit of a break, good 4 years off of podcasting, but here I am, I'm back. And I could not be more thrilled to have as my very first guest someone I've had on the prior show before, but someone who's always up to really, really interesting things. And that would be Paul deGrandis. Hello, Paul.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, not at all. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the show is about, and then we will spend a lot of our time talking about what you've been up to lately. So the show is called Get Smarter and Make Things. Get Smarter and Make Stuff. It's my own show. You'd think I get the name right. So Get Smarter and Make Stuff is a website that I created based on this. It's not really a realization since I've known it for a good almost 40 years, but I really like two things in my spare time when I'm by myself and pursuing only my own goals, and I'm not hanging out with the family or whatever. I really enjoy getting smarter and making things, and that those two things really go together for me. A lot of times when I'm making something, the part that I like about it is that I learn something. Although I do just learn things, and sometimes I make things and I didn't learn anything because I already knew how to do it, knew exactly what I was doing. So I enjoy them both separately, but I also enjoy them both together. And it just made a lot of sense to me. And the URL is available, quite frankly, getsmarterandmakestuff.com, that I made a website, and I've been doing some YouTube videos and doing a little bit of blogging. But I thought, this is a fun thing for me to talk to about other people with. Talk to other people about. There's some prepositions in there.
Yeah,
put them in the right order. Pick the permutation that makes that make sense. Anyway, and I know a lot of interesting people. I was really fortunate to meet many interesting people in the Clojure space when I was doing the last podcast for Cognitect. For those of you that don't know, Clojure is a programming language that I'm pretty into. This will not be a Clojure podcast, so if you came looking for the continuation of the Cognicast, it's not going to be that. We will talk about software because writing software is making stuff. In my opinion, it's a creative act, the same way that making something in the wood shop or whatever is, and a lot of people I know are doing it. And also, there's just like really interesting things you can do when you combine software with real things, and we'll talk more about that too. Anyway, I figure we can make a show and we can ask two questions. We can ask, what are you learning and what are you making? And then maybe it'll sort of naturally cover if those two things intersect. But even if it doesn't, that I think would be a super interesting show. Certainly for the people that I plan to have on. I've already got a list that's growing rapidly. And Paul is right up there on it, obviously. I think those people are going to be able to say many, many, many interesting things about those two topics. And so really that's the idea. Is I don't know how many of these we'll do, or how regular it will be or whatever. I am, hopeful that it'll be a pretty regular thing, and that you'll get to hear a lot of these and you'll find them as enjoyable as I suspect you will, and I think that I will. But I think asking those two questions and letting interesting people answer them is gonna work. So anyway, let's prove me right. I did pick Paul on purpose. He's like so interesting that this is gonna be like falling off a log. So let's just jump right in. That's enough blah de blah for me. And Paul, you can answer these questions in either order that you like, or tear off into something unrelated. This is my show. We get to do whatever I want, and what I want is to hear from you. But maybe if you feel like it, we can answer those questions. What are you learning and what are you making?
Yeah.
Go.
So I think this is these two questions are a great set of questions, and we had talked beforehand about coming on and doing this show, and so I was like, okay, well, I have to have some interesting nuggets to like share with Craig that we can chat about for a while. And your shop, I've seen your YouTube videos. Your shop, I'm a subscriber, by the way. Craig's not going to say this, but I will. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Oh, I'll say it.
Okay,
I get it. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. Like, I know it's kind of the thing, right? I'm going to have to kind of get over that. But yes, I will be telling people how they can do all those things. But
Perfect.
I appreciate that nonetheless.
Perfect. Okay, so I've seen your shop, and I've seen you do work in your shop from your videos, and And your shop is very different from my shop. In fact, I call my shop a lab. And so the
Mm,
first question I want to start on is, what are you making? Because what I make is similar to what you make, but I specifically call my space a lab and not a shop because I don't have all the things that go into a shop. Like my workbench is not that important to me, which
mm,
might seem like a crazy thing to say to somebody who said, like that's the heart of most shops. That's like that's where work gets done. But not in my lab, right? My lab, I just need a surface to assemble or to inspect, or it's just a working surface. It's not like an
hmm.
actual like bench surface that I need to do
Yeah,
work
we could
on.
spend a lot of time talking about workbenches. I
Yeah,
will briefly interject that for a woodworker, the bench is a critical thing because it's a clamping utility. And if you, I'm sure you're going to talk about what you're into. If you don't need to hold things still while you do violent stuff to them, then yeah, a workbench is not going to be as critical as it is for someone like me.
totally. In fact, mobility and the fact that my bench folds up in like a pretty interesting way, and I can move it to various stations around my lab. That's
Mm,
way more important for me to be able to like move my work to a different station than it is to have a clamping service. Because I don't do a lot like I do a lot of mechatronic stuff. So I mean that's what I'm going to jump into here in a second. But like I need like little tweezer hands on little stands to hold pieces together. Like here's a
sure.
PCB that I made, and I need to hold it here in place because I only have two hands. So it's a lot of stuff like that. So typically, what am I building? Well, the things that I build, they fall into three categories. So the first category I think is pretty interesting, and we'll talk a lot about, I'm sure, and that is open innovation challenges. So like NASA has this great site, NASA Solve. Um, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, has a thing called AmericanMadeChallenges.org. There's all these like really interesting, open-ended innovation, design problems, prototyping problems, all sorts of stuff. And it's like solving, these are the problems people want to solve. It's like, okay, how do we fix this crazy hard problem? How do we, you know, make this renewable source work better? How do we do all sorts of stuff? One was like, how do you get ice from the moon back to Earth? Like,
Hmm.
cool. Like how do you get stuff from the moon? If we extract ice from the moon, how do we like take these samples and get them back to Earth, and like a self-launching system?
So giant slingshot.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
because it's
Okay.
easy to escape that orbit, right? Like you just
Right.
yeah. So
Catching it. That guy will solve that problem later, I guess.
yeah, exactly. You've got many kilometers to solve the other end of that problem.
Yeah.
Um, so about a third of the stuff that I do are these kinds of open innovation design challenges from lots of different sites and lots of different organizations. And typically, what I actually spend my most time on is localization problems, and we can talk about that, and also accessibility problems. How do you design or re-engineer environments such that they're accessible for all types of people, all sorts of interactions? Um, and actually, I think those two problems are the reason why I work on those kinds of problems, those two areas. They're very, very similar. There's a lot of similarities between them.
Hmm. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So there was this one design challenge that was about how do you like reimagining. I'm going to totally butcher the actual challenge now because it's been a couple of months, but like how would you re-engineer um, a building such that everybody, regardless of ability or disability, participates or functions in the building exactly the same. So as an example, like somebody who's blind walks into the building, walks through the lobby, goes immediately to the elevator, opens the elevator, gets off at whatever floor they're working at, you know, strolls to their desk, chatting to people as they walk by, sits at their desk and starts working. Like you would have no notion that this person is, challenged without sight. They just sort of work through the space naturally. So, how do you engineer a space like that? And what got me started in this area is sort of this interesting point of view is we created society, right? We created how people work in society. It was up to humans to decide, these are the design rules. These are the ways that people will or won't interact with buildings. It was a decision, and we could have
Hmm.
made a totally different decision. And and that's why I love this. Like, once that thought got in my brain, I couldn't take it out. Like
Mm.
like why can't everybody participate in a building or participate with an automobile or some form of transit, or anything at, in the exact same manner, sort of extract equal value out of those things. So
Hmm. So I mean, is it the fact that sort of a reinvention? It's like it really requires you to sort of back way up and go, you know, I don't know, like how would you cook without a stove kind of thing. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like to take out everything and
yeah,
start over.
yeah. It's just the thing that actually, um, I like that kind of a challenge, and all of these challenges are of that scale of like,
Hmm.
there are no rules for this thing. Like, we're asking a question. These design challenges are asking a question for which, there's no established rules here. Like, let's go. Anything can happen, right? Anything can
Hmm.
happen here. So the thing that I particularly like about the sort of accessibility piece is just like, it's like the imagination aspect. Like, close your eyes and try to, like, I live in a small New England town, and there are lots of people who visit cities, and like, imagine just closing your eyes, or closing your eyes and your ears, or spin yourself around 20 times so you're really dizzy, and then go navigate. Like, how do you make your way through that space? Like, how people make their way through spaces is like a really fascinating topic for me. So I spend a lot of time building stuff about how people, or even how robots, now we're into localization, how robots make their way through space.
Yeah, you said localization a couple times now. Can you define what that means in this context?
Yeah, so I'm going to define it incorrectly, but very specific to the kinds of things I work on. So localization would be exactly that. How does a robot recognize its environment around itself and make its way through that particular space and
Gotcha.
navigate that space? And you can imagine, if I take sensor input away from a robot, and now I have a problem that looks a lot like, how do humans make their way through spaces if they lose sensory input?
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, I think I'm following.
Cool. So, about a third of my stuff, a third of the things that I build, I'm building prototypes to solve these kinds of design problems. You formally submit them if you want to. They're contests. You can make a pretty decent amount of money on the side if you're good at this sort of thing. Sometimes it's just rewards. So, I do a lot of these challenges because you get dev kits, or you get access to new hardware, and it's an easy way for me to acquire cheap experimental hardware that I've
Paul, why do you need tools? Well, to make things. Well, why are you making things? To get
that's how
tools.
I get my tools. Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Yeah, so it's, and also I just really love the challenge. These are problems that really ought to be worked on, and it really is my passion to sort of work on those kinds of problems. So
Hmm.
that's about a third. But another
Okay.
another third of stuff that I build is just, I would say, like very curiosity driven. Like, does the crisper in your fridge really make things crisper?
Yes. Oh my God, I can't sleep now. All right, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So I got really. This happens all the time, and my wife is a very great sport about, like, seeing weird stuff that I've, like, rigged up around the house to, like, measure something or augment something or whatever. But I just get curious, and I'm like, whoa, I'm going to build something to find the answer. Like, how does a crisper make things crisper?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I totally make things for no. I get done and I'm like, why did I do this?
yeah,
Like,
totally.
there's no why would this thing doesn't need to exist? But I think the answer is, like I said it earlier, right? Like I think a lot of us are driven to make and to learn by making and to enjoy learning in making. And it's taken me a little. There was sort of a point where I had to sort of say, no, it's okay. You can make something for no reason because my time's really limited, just like everybody's is,
Yeah.
I'd sometimes get a little too intense about it, and I'm like, oh man, I got to finish this because I only have so much time. And I started to stop at one point and say, no, an hour. I mean, it's fine to like make things and maybe you have a deadline because it's for somebody else or that's okay. But it's also okay to say, I spent an hour in the shop. And if I produced 3 units of whatever, or I produced 1 unit of whatever, it doesn't matter. It was that 1 hour that was the product. That
Yes.
was the thing, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
just the joy of like that
Hmm.
real rich interaction of I think it's humans are naturally explorers, and really building something to understand a thing is just some expression of exploration, right? Like
Mm,
I'm going into the CRISPR for the first time. What will I find? It's
yeah.
just such a puzzle, you know. Yeah, so and then just like i'm a real big I'm a real big believer in like the mini factory in your house kind of a vision, like
Hmm.
that we can have these mini factories in our house and they can produce whatever widget we want it to produce. So my lab is effectively that little mini factory, and if I need something around the house, or I need a new custom tool, or I need to build a new stopper for some water thing, that was one of the things I built last weekend. I like going into the mini factory that's in my lab and building that thing.
Hmm.
There it is. It's done. And then the last third of stuff that I build um, is espresso machines. I'm like really
It's a
into
whole category.
a whole
Okay.
category of just building and hacking espresso machines. And if I got to tell you, for all of the listeners, if you're like, what could I possibly build? Let me just tell you, espresso machine's really great place to start. It's a really fascinating platform for doing stuff
Huh.
because it's got everything you want to play with. It's got temperature, it's got pressure, it's got fluid dynamics, it's got moving fluids, it's got small control boards, it's got everything. And then at the end, you make a coffee. Like
Mm,
it's such a
yeah.
funny little platform to build with. But yeah, it's real fun.
So, I mean, I have to ask, how many espresso machines have you made?
That worked completely. We're gonna have to have like a success criteria here.
Yeah, well, just give us the total, and then maybe like, of those, how many were ones you're like, no, that is done. It's good. I would give this to somebody else and tell them you can make your espresso with this. You'd be happy.
Yeah, so I would say there's probably been, I don't know, like a dozen-ish or so that have gotten finished in some form. And of that dozen, I would say three were to the point that I would give them to somebody, like they were of the
Hmm.
quality I would give them to somebody else and say, that thing actually can do espresso. Like that thing
And
can.
it won't like vent hot steam in your
Yeah,
face, or
I
which I
mean,
suppose is probably a concern.
espresso is made at 9 bars. So, like,
Really?
yeah, you
Okay.
could have I mean, that's like a very big pressure vessel that could explode. So, my limiting this to three is more like I'm worried about people's well being.
Well, I think that's pretty good. I mean, 3 out of 12. I mean, so I'm working on a project in the shop right now, and it's a thing called an electronic lead screw. I posted an update about it on the YouTube channel. I'll talk more about it sometime, maybe. But it's a fairly straightforward project from a kind of typical microcontroller. Has a sensor and controls a motor. Very, I think you could describe a lot of things that way. And so it's pretty straightforward. It has 4 or 5 major components: power supply, a microcontroller, a motor controller, a motor, and then a little control panel. I have now, as of yesterday, replaced every single one of those parts at least
Yeah.
once. Like every single one of them, I've thought to myself, "Oh, that's not working," and gotten a replacement, and then half the time discovered that no, it was the other thing. So anyway, my point being that 3 out of 12, that's pretty good. I think there's a great shirt I mentioned on the blog at one point. There's a YouTube channel called, is it Caitlin and Evelyn, or Caitlin and Evan, or Evan and Caitlin? I forget. It's a married couple, I believe they're married anyway, and they make stuff, and it's great. They're super fun, really kind of bubbly people, but they do interesting projects as well. And he or she, or if I've seen it on him, maybe she wears it too. It has this great shirt, and it reads "Make, fail, make, fail, make." And I just think that is so great. Like that's the thing, right? Like you cannot, if you don't like failure, you don't like making,
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, nobody likes failure really, but if you can't tolerate it at all, if it's like the worst thing, then probably the lifestyle of sort of, engineering and discovery that you're describing is not going to be a happy one for you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Like there are more times about, well, I don't want to do the cliche thing and say like, yeah, but because in all of those failures, that's like you've learned something, right? That failure happened
Hmm.
because you were missing some knowledge, and then you gained the knowledge, and then you could like take the next step
Hmm.
forward. But
Yeah.
but
Get smarter and make stuff.
exactly, you got smarter, and then you made more stuff with that
Yeah.
new knowledge. Yeah.
So I have to ask, have you had any like truly spectacular failures in espresso making, espresso machine making?
Yes. Yeah. Totally. Thankfully, like none that have seriously hurt myself, but like anytime you have 9 bars of pressure plus boiling water, like something's gonna go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any that make a good story, or just sort of something went hiss swoosh and you were jumped out of the way?
Yeah, it's most of the stories are like that. There's nothing spectacular because there's
Mm.
no. I really tend to think the spectacular things are when you get into like CNC. Like that's when you get like a spectacular failure. Like
Yeah.
the robot arm ran into the machine itself and then just like drilled through itself. Like that's when you get something crazy. But yeah, mostly the espresso stuff is like it exploded, but it's just hot water and steam and
Sure.
yeah.
Are you familiar with? I don't know how much YouTube you watch. Are you familiar with? I think it's Make Anything.
I am. Yep.
Yeah. So did you see the one he did with the robot arm with the chainsaw at the end of it?
I have seen this in my feed because it keeps getting suggested
Yeah.
to me, but I haven't watched that one yet.
Well, it's pretty amazing. I won't. I mean, there's not much to spoil. It is a robot arm, like an industrial, full size robot arm with a chainsaw at the end of it that he builds for reasons. I'll let you watch the video to understand. But
Yeah.
talk about kill zone, right? Like the arm alone could kill you, and then put a rotating blade at the end of it.
Yeah.
It's just you really have to have a certain type of special, although not rare, personality, right? There are a lot of us, right? There are a lot of us who feel this I don't know, I guess compulsion or whatever. Like there are a lot of people who I think, I happen to nab the domain name, but I think it's like pretty common. The maker culture you have right now, get smarter and make stuff. That's really, I, I know I keep saying the name of the website. Right? Anyway, whatever. Like I said, I got to get over the whole self promotion thing. It is awesome, I think, to have this. There's just a lot of us, and it's a fun thing to share, and it's fascinating to watch other people experience and put out on display this, in some ways, very weird compulsion, right? Like I totally get it. You say, "Oh man, yeah, I've made 12 espresso machines," and at one level, I have enough detachment to go, "That's really weird." Right?
Yeah.
Like it's really a weird thing to have built 12 espresso machines,
Yeah.
especially when 9 of them
Yeah.
failed.
None of them are like really no good.
Yeah, 9 of them were no good at all, and they sprayed really hot water everywhere. And you can get an espresso machine off of Amazon for like, some totally affordable amount of money for, the type of people that have money to spend on things like robot arms and
Yeah.
chainsaws. So on the one hand, it's like, it's really weird. But on the other hand, you say that and you're like, I'm like, I totally get it. I completely get why you would make 12 espresso
Yeah.
machines.
Because you make the first one and it fails in a way that you're like, aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do
I
this.
can do
Yeah,
this.
let's do this one again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And then you get one that works and you're like, okay, it works, but dot dot
Right.
dot. Like
Right.
it
Right.
could have worked this other way. Like it should have like failure 3 should have definitely worked now that I understand this thing.
Yeah, and the one you have in your kitchen is somebody's failure number 350. And
Yeah.
so you have that to compare with, right?
Yeah, totally. And honestly, some of the sort of the best ones that I've done have just been like I took. There's this one espresso machine. It's in the espresso world. Everybody knows it. It's called the Gaussian Classic, and it's like the bare essential, everything you need to build an espresso machine with enough room inside the espresso machine to shove whatever else you need to shove in there. Like it's
Okay.
it's like the perfect platform. So it's got a good.
It's like the K car of espresso
Yeah,
machines.
exactly. It's got a perfect pump plus like enough tubing that it's like
Yeah.
they knew somebody was going to cut that tubing and put something else between it. So
Hmm.
and it's so simple. It's like a pump that goes immediately into a boiler that sits right on top of like the brew head thing that makes the espresso, and that's pretty much it. There's like a thermostat control, and so you just patch yourself right into this, and suddenly like you got a leg up. You're like, okay, what can I do? You know.
I love that there's probably somewhere a community of some sort, a Reddit thread or whatever of people who mod this particular
An
thing.
army, not even just one. There is like
Of course.
multiple forums, multiple different subcultures inside of here of like, if you do this mod, you're like part of that group. If you do this other mod, you're
Yeah.
part of this other group. Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just that makes me happy, like I think it's whatever. We could talk about the internet some other time, I guess, but it's a very cool thing that can exist, and that I think the world has become for a lot of people a safer place to do that kind of thing,
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
And you said a thing before that there's a lot of people who find joy in this, that enjoy this kind of activity, that like to tinker in this particular way. Like my wife always jokes, she's like, you're such a good tinkerer. Like you're going into the lab, you're going to go tinker around, and it's like, yeah, I'm going to go tinker around. It's so much fun. But
Hmm.
for the longest time, I sort of, how do you tell somebody about that hobby? And so I just never shared it with anybody unless I knew them from like a previous job, or I knew them from like building things in other labs and so on. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was like
I mean, you do have to be a little bit careful, right, in
yeah,
social circumstances
yeah,
because, we're here, we're on the show, like we're talking to people that are probably of a very similar mindset. You and I are the similar mindset, but you don't necessarily want to go to every party and talk about how great the TI launch 2904C is for half an hour.
yeah. And that's the thing that I honestly miss the most. And the thing that I'm actually still sort of nervous about is like talking about gear, because like my lab is really different from most people's shop, if whatever they have in their shop.
Hmm.
So I always feel like, man, I really want to talk about gear, but like I do more sort of mechatronic kind of stuff, and most of the people I know, they like do serious woodworking and so on. So it's like, yeah, I've got the smallest drill press you can imagine because it's just not important for me.
Yeah, there's all sorts. I mean, it was interesting for me when I went from being primarily a woodworker as my main sort of creative outlet. If you don't count software, actually, because I think that counts too when you're a maker if you write software in my mind.
Totally.
Um, but when I went from that to starting to experiment with metalworking and then other things like resin and CNC routing and whatnot, I started to expand my horizons by watching more stuff on YouTube. Was just to see, that there are these really different separate communities, and of course, I mean, duh, right? But like, to realize that there's all these enclaves, if you will, and that, as you say, it is easy to think, oh yeah, the world looks like people are woodworkers and they're either power tool or hand tool or maybe somewhere in between, and that's kind of mainly what people do in their garages. But no,
Yeah.
I know one of my neighbors, actually not my immediate neighbor, but a kid in a family in our neighborhood that one of my daughters is associated with by a Girl Scout troop. The father is making an autonomous lawnmower,
Perfect.
right? And so I think that's a lot more like your kind of thing.
Totally. I actually started to try it, and then my wife put that project on ice pretty quickly.
You like to live on the dangerous side of things, don't you? I mean, boiling water and like whirling blades and
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, because
Yeah.
I already have a battery powered lawnmower that's like pretty small, 16-inch lawnmower. And I was like, what a platform. I already opened it up and I was like, well, this makes total sense to me. So
Hmm.
how can I make it like, how can I take my love of localization and my really cool lawnmower here and marry the two together?
Yeah, I should get him to come on sometime. He had some interesting challenges. One of which is they have chickens. I mean, I think the chickens generally take care of avoiding the lawnmower, but I don't know to what degree he had to work that into the whole thing.
Do you know if he started from scratch? There's also like an Arduino based lawnmower kit thing that I had considered.
I mean, I have actually been to his place, and we didn't have long to talk about. I was picking up my daughter from a thing at his house, but I'm pretty sure that he is going very much the custom route.
Yeah, awesome.
So yeah,
Very awesome.
good stuff. Well, cool. So first of all, I got to say, coming back to the fact that you call your workspace your lab, I love that. Because I think, what do you do in a shop? You make things, but what do you do in a lab? You experiment,
Yeah.
right? And the notion that I think I think lab is probably actually more accurate for what some of us are doing than shop, because it's not a small factory, right? It's the notion is not. I mean, some people, and it's fine if they do this, right? If they're more on the make things side of things, or they're more on the like the artifact is
Yeah,
the thing
like
that gives them pleasure.
the fabrication, right? If
Yeah,
they're like
right.
clearly a fabricator. Yeah,
Right, and that's totally fine. I don't mean
totally.
to say that that's not a legitimate. I mean, you should do what you like, but I think, like for what I do, a lot of times I don't know if it's going to work,
Yeah.
right? And so the notion of a lab, of a space as a lab, is one I really like. But I want to switch to make sure that we cover both questions. Right? You've talked a bit about it, but I wonder whether there's anything you have to say in answer to the question, what are you learning? Right. I've got some idea that you have a very broad set of things that you're making. A lot of them are, as you say, robotics, but there's also espresso machines
Yeah.
and so forth. Um, and, moon slingshots and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
like, do you engage much? I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Do you engage much in activities where the sole outcome is some enhancement of your understanding on some topic or another?
I would say more than half of the stuff that I'm doing is primarily driven from just trying to explore and understand a field, right? Like I have no formal training in mechanical engineering or in accessibility or design of those things, and I am like learning through doing and really pouring over, textbooks and whatever I need to in order to make up that difference. Because honestly, I think for the listeners, I write, my day job is making software, and I very much enjoy making software. But if I didn't do that, I definitely would be a mechanical engineer, and
Hmm.
it's sort of like a second life kind of a thing. Like my lab time is just about like, okay, well, let me go learn that. Let me go be a mechanical engineer in my lab. So um, there's lots of topics here that we can dive into.
Well, I'm kind of curious to hear if there's. I know we've talked a bit about this at work. So we work together. Paul and I both work at Kevel, formerly known as AdZerk, if some of you might have heard of it that way. And we work together. We're on the same team, which is awesome. And we both provide, at some of the time at least, mentorship to other engineers. And Paul is particularly good at providing structured learning for people, both unstructured and structured learning. And so I'm curious to hear if you have an approach that you take to learning that is in some way regimented or formalized, or otherwise something that you could sort of say, if you want to get smarter, do X, then Y, then Z, right? Because I suspect you have something to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I do have something to say, but the thing that I have to say is that it's going to let the listener down, which is like I know exactly how I learn. Like
Hmm.
it was something because for listeners of the previous podcast, they might know, but like I am very dyslexic, so it takes me. Uh, and actually, Craig and I made the joke, like, how does a dyslexic person read the instructions for like machinery? So, like,
It was a genuine question. I wasn't making a joke. I was just because people should actually go listen to that. I don't know if I'm gonna do show notes or not, but if I do, the link to the episode will be there. If not, go to search for Paul deGrandis Cognicast, and you'll find it. But listen to the episode about dyslexia that we did. It's actually, of the 120 episodes I did for Cognitect. I'm quite proud of the whole suite of them, but there are a few that are in my top few favorites, and that is definitely one of them. I highly encourage people to go listen to that. I found it utterly fascinating to hear about how dyslexia is a difference in learning ability.
Yeah.
That was the kind of my improved my understanding that it's not a learning disability, but a difference in ability. Anyway, that's super interesting. So, but yes, we have commented that obviously dyslexia is, as you've said, your superpower, right? Because
Yes.
you are not in any way unable to learn. Like you learn in a way that I envy, um, and aspire to, approach. So anyway, so anything you had to say on the topic? I think I know what you're about to say, which is that learning is specific to you, but nonetheless, I think people might find it valuable to hear it.
Yeah. So the way that I really have to process information is by looking at really large themes first and connecting them to what seem like very unrelated other large themes, but in my head, like they seem exactly alike. They seem like they're natural pairs to each other, and they might be something totally unrelated, like naval architecture is just like RDF notation or something. It's like
Huh.
it could be something very weird like that, but that association is how I start to structure the rest of the knowledge in my head. It's how I sort of make sense of things. And then I drill down from there. So how do I go about learning new stuff? It, the way that I discover things in the lab is very much that. It's like I know a theme, I know an area that I want to explore or experience with, and my interaction with that topic in the lab is like me literally trying to like dismantle that topic little by little. Like I walk up to a topic and I don't know anything about it. So like what's the big picture that I need to know? And then I know enough to sort of find the edges of that notion. And then I see, oh, it doesn't work this way. It does work this way. And, this other way, it breaks. Okay, well, what's the next level? Like, why? Why does it do that? And I can sort of drill down from there. And then that's sort of how I fit together all the little bits of knowledge. But I really cannot go from like okay, tell me all of the first principles. And from the first principles, I'll see the larger picture. Like, that would
Hmm.
never work for me. So it's just years of that, right? Because when you go through school, that's how most topics are taught in school, at least engineering topics. Like, you learn the first principles, and then you learn like some sort of higher level thing on top of those first principles, and then you learn these sort of larger arcs.
Hmm.
Um,
So I mean, first of all, that sounds like a big thing that you're doing is giving yourself permission to explore, right? Not
yes.
letting. I think time pressure is a big deal for me. I have this sign on the door of my shop. I mean, to one of these days I'll CNC carve it and make it nice, but it's just a printed out piece of paper taped to my door, and it is like a traffic sign. It's yellow with black borders. It's a diamond. It says slow, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that it's okay to slow down, kind of what I was talking about earlier. And I think it's related in that you have given yourself permission to branch out and go, you know what? I know I'm supposed to be building a robot, but right now I need to go learn about naval architecture,
Yeah.
and that's like an okay thing to do. Um, and I wonder, but then so my question is sort of, okay, first of all, that's great, right? Like to branch out like that, and I assume sometimes it doesn't pan out. In fact, you kind of implied that. But when you do decide to go and investigate something, what are your sources? I mean, I know you've been very good about educating the team at Kevel to make use of Google Scholar
Yep.
and actually really go and read academic papers, which is not something that's a typical part of a lot of developers day to day, but is something that you've helped us to level up on. I still don't do it as much as I should, certainly. So I think you do that, but like, what are your other go tos? Like when you're like, I need to get smarter about naval architecture, you're the first place you would turn would be, I don't know.
Yeah. That, we picked a bad topic because naval
Sure.
architecture has a very specific answer, but I'll give you
Okay.
a general answer. We'll come back to naval architecture. So I approach my lab. it was banged in my head when the early part of my career was all in research, in academic research, in government research, and so on, in like very advanced research labs. And a lot of my mentors at the time and my professors in college, they were all Bell Labs folks. So like the lab mentality and how to explore an unknown topic and how to go after a challenge that seems impossible, that's like a thing that was really beaten into my head. So the first the first thing you always have to tell yourself is uh, a, it's okay to be really excited and to try a thing with complete, like the most naive thing you could possibly try, and just absolutely ignore all literature and information in the field. Like, give yourself the permission to do that first so you get a sense of the essence of the topic that you're going after. Like, you want to sort of get a sense of the gestalt, and you don't want to have your thoughts or your approach or your ideas biased at that point. You want to just jump into it and sort of find the things you naturally fall in love with. So I always do that. I just try something. I just do something. I want to try to understand it just by, like, if I didn't know anything, because I don't know anything, that's
Hmm.
there's excitement in that. And then after that, you have to tell yourself you're clearly not the first person to do this.
Yeah, right.
Like, this is probably already really well understood, and you shouldn't expect yourself. Well, I mean, everybody follow your own path. I'm not going to tell anybody sort of what to do here, but I never expect for myself that I'm going to come up with the most novel thing. That's not what I'm after, right? I'm not after the most novel thing. What I'm after is learning that thing. And so, how do I get on the shoulders of giants here? Like, so what do I
Hmm.
do? Well, I mean, you nailed it already. I go to Google Scholar. I look at OpenCourseWare. I try to find all the syllabuses for all of the top engineering schools, and I look at what their reading lists are. I sort of, somebody has already organized this information and what they thought was essential and what they thought wasn't essential. And I just need to go find all of those sources. So I collect all of these sources. And then the very next thing that I try to do is, of those sources, which of them are sort of more like surveys that will give me a good overview of the field, or has somebody given like a 1 hour presentation of, like, here's the intro to everything we're going to cover, and like, can I just go read that and like just get a sense, the lay of the land? And then from there I can sort of identify, oh, these are the topics that I really need to dig into. Again, back to Google Scholar, like, what are the canonical texts for that topic? And now I have my reference text. I've got a good survey paper or something that tells me the lay of the land. And because I did this crazy exploration with just, being as naive I possibly could, I've already got a setup in my lab of all of the sort of the pieces that I need to explore that topic.
Hmm. It's interesting as you say that. I'm thinking about the fact that in software, I've observed that many people, and I won't exclude myself from this, it seems like we're after um, being the first one on the moon. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, totally.
Like we all want to make a thing, and it proceeds from first principles and solves the problem from the ground up. That just seems to be a really strong tendency. I know I have this tendency. Certainly, at times, I like to think I've gotten better at it over the years, but I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. I mean, I guess it's exciting to think that you're an inventor,
Yes.
which I think we could probably talk about whether what each of us is doing at various times is in fact invention, or whether it's engineering, or whether it's being a technician, or whether those things are in fact different. Like, there's a bunch of interesting words that you can use to describe aspects of the I don't know, technical creation process, I suppose, right? Whether that's woodworking or metalworking
Yep.
or robotics or whatever. There's a sort of, I mean, because like, get smarter and make stuff, right? Like, for me, that generally does not mean painting a painting, but that's fine if it does. And I'm sure that, in fact, I'm beyond sure, I'm positive that there is as much self education involved in what you might consider to be artistic pursuits, sculpture, painting, the fine arts, I guess you could say. Um, I don't draw as much of a distinction between those and someone going into the shop and making things with gears and belts and that kind of thing. I think that they're both creative acts, and there's a lot more in common than there is different. But anyway, so like, but for whatever reason, I feel like there's that sort of, and maybe this is true for the fine arts as well, and I'm just not as familiar. I feel like there's that tendency, certainly in software, but even more broadly in sort of, technical, technical creativity of like you got to plant the flag,
Yeah.
and it's okay not to, is what you're saying, and I agree.
Yeah. It's a habit I really, in software specifically, it's a habit I really try to break people of. That that's not necessarily somewhere there was a myth, and it was told to a lot of people that like that's the mark of making great
Right.
software.
Yes.
We just got to tell a different story. The story is, did you find the best possible knowledge you could find and evaluate the trade-offs the best possible way, and then make the best decision with that knowledge in hand, like
Right. Right.
yeah.
Because I mean, for our jobs, I mean, because that's another thing too. If you're doing it on the side, go for it.
Yeah.
You want to make a new language and then write your program in your language and then whatever. Totally fine, admirable, awesome, good stuff. But for our jobs, right, where we're being paid, if we start from ground up, well, that first espresso machine you made, like
Exactly.
that's the thing we're making, right? And not the one that's sitting on your counter that's somebody's 500th failure.
Yeah.
So it's really important to separate work and hobby. And it's interesting to hear you say that, just like me, you really enjoy your job, you know, uh, but that your spare time is different, right? That I think it becomes important once you achieve a sort of certain level. I think for those that are newer in their careers, it actually is maybe even important that when they leave work, they go and hack. And there's nothing wrong with people that, I mean, I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with, or that you can't be an excellent software engineer and still do it in your spare time. That's also fine.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to talk to people who are a little farther along than those at the beginning of their career and find that it's more common to say, oh yeah, my hobby is painting, my hobby is woodworking, my hobby is something that's not software. And maybe you still do some, but like that there's this other making activity that is not making software. I find it interesting that seems to become more common as people progress.
Yeah. I'm sort of the bad case there in that. I mean, as you know, like Craig said, we work together, so it's no surprise to Craig, but a pretty big chunk of my time is this same curiosity, but about like, there's so many areas to software and knowledge representation. Like, there's lots of interesting topics. And so while my creation or exploration time might not be, writing code or making a programming language or something like that, a lot of my learning time, every morning I'm reading papers related to software or related to something about my day job because I just naturally find that stuff fascinating. Like, that's still fun for me. But yeah, the lab is just all about exploration. And I think people who are early in their careers in software, like, they're still in that exploration phase, right?
Mm,
That's still the exciting thing. I'm a real big believer. I don't know if it's clear to the listeners, but that like humans naturally want to explore. That's the thing we naturally want to do. Like we're naturally curious beings that want to push the envelope, that want to explore, that see something in like maybe if I turn it the other way, like
yeah. Hold my beer.
yeah,
Right. Like
exactly.
that is, I mean, there's a joke there, but like that is fundamentally like an exploration, right? Like
Yes, yeah,
you clearly didn't know exactly what was going to happen next, or you wouldn't have wound up in the emergency room.
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, the lab is just like a big space to just continue that journey.
Totally. Huh. Gosh, this is good stuff. But we're coming up on like 50 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll have you back on. I mean, whatever, I see you every day. So like I knew. So this is a great thing about the show with two questions, right? What are you learning? What are you making? Right? Like I know that is an infinite number of hours even if I limited myself to like 4 guests, like I could just, and I won't, but we could just cycle through those 4, and I bet we could always have more stuff to say. But I actually, so I'm going to steal something from the old podcast, and I'm going to close the show. Well, so first of all, I don't want to cut off. Like, if there's anything else that you think is really important that we say here, let's do that first. If there's not, I have a question for you. But if there is, let's cover that.
There's just one thing. I said we would get back to naval architecture, and I was like, ooh, yeah, he's finishing up the show, but I didn't say the naval architecture thing. Here's the spoiler to all the listeners, and I'm sure there's a mechanical engineer listening that's like cringing right now when I say the answer.
Yeah, they can leave a comment.
Yeah, but effectively, there's like a very well-established volume of books about naval architecture, and just that's like the go-to source. Everybody, anytime you have a question about naval architecture, they're like, that's volume 2, like, or that's in volume 3, like that's the thing. Go look at volume 3. So yeah, naval architecture is not so exciting. There's only, he said there's only 1 volume of books to a listener. There's lots of books about naval architecture, but
now, I hear what you're saying, though, that it's a highly studied, well understood, and of course, whatever. Anyway, I'm not going to try to comment because I'm pretty ignorant on the topic. But I do have a friend who I want to have on, who was the commander of the USS Cole, and it might be really interesting to talk to him about. He actually works at the NTSB now, investigating naval accidents, maritime accidents.
That would be super fascinating.
He's a really great guy, a really close friend of mine, and he's on my list of people to get on the show. So we'll have him on soon. Anyway, so maybe naval architecture will come up again. Who knows? Maybe it'll be in every episode. I have no idea. We're gonna see. But cool. So I'm glad I'm glad you stopped me and that we touched base on that. But if it works for you, I have actually I have 2 questions for you.
Sure, fire away.
First one is, where can people find you, like on the web, or if there's any, like if there's anything hey, if you're interested in Paul, go to whatever.
Yeah, I would, my all my handles are Opauleez, OHPAULEEZ. So Opauleez on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on GitHub. I tend not to put my lab stuff online, although I've been doing that more through Twitter. So like I was doing some localization stuff with a drone, and I said, who wants to see this drone crash into my house multiple times, And so yeah, you can find stuff. You can harass me on Twitter for more lab pictures and videos, and I will definitely post them.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, people should definitely follow you on Twitter. I mean, I think you can sense that Paul is into many, many interesting things, and it would be highly worthwhile on your part to do so. All right, cool. So the last question is the one that I'm stealing from the other show, which I always really liked, which is, do you have any advice for our listeners? And it can be advice on anything. It does not have to be about making things or about getting smarter. But I just think it's a missed opportunity to have the really, really intelligent and interesting people I have on the show and not get them to give some kind of advice. So do you have a piece of advice that we can close down on?
I've got 2 nuggets of advice, and they're very closely related. So I'm going to say it's one piece of advice. And the first piece of advice is to just give yourself permission. I think all too often we say, oh, I'm not going to do this thing because, or I've got imposter syndrome, or any number of excuses that we can just tell ourselves. And they're just fictitious monsters we've made up in our heads. Like, just give yourself permission to do the thing you want to do. And the second piece of advice is, whatever you're doing, if it's bringing you happiness, like that's the thing to do. Like that's the important part. And so don't get hung up on it. Give yourself permission. If it's bringing you happiness, keep doing it. Like that's the thing to keep doing.
Awesome. Well, that's a really great place to end on. I got to thank you a ton for taking the time to come on today, Paul. I know that we've both been working hard, making the systems at Kevel better, and it's the end of a fairly long week, but it was fun to kind of close it out here on a Friday afternoon with you, and thanks a ton for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much. This was I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, so thank you so much.
Me too. Well, we will definitely do it again. All right, but we will close down there. This is Get Smarter and Make Stuff. Thanks for listening. You have been listening to Get Smarter and Make Stuff. I'm your host, Craig Andera. Visit the show online at getsmarterandmakestuff.com. That's all spelled out, all one word. Go there to subscribe to and comment on the show, read the blog, view the gallery, and find a link to the Get Smarter and Make Stuff YouTube channel. Come on by. We're also on Twitter at MakeSmartStuff. If you enjoyed the show and feel like sharing with others you think might like it too, I'd certainly appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.